What a difference to the government to have Bronwyn Bishop finally resign over her expenses. Finally, the Prime Minister could talk about something else, like spending $20 billion to build up to 9 Navy frigates in Adelaide. And it was back to politics as usual, unfortunately.
We will have a build-up to about 2,500 workers.
Tony Abbott has got a very simple choice. Does he keep his promise to the Japanese Prime Minister to let Japan build our submarines, or does he keep his promise to the people of Australia that the submarines will be built here in Australia?
And yes, the Liberals' former Defence Minister did make that stupid promise before the last election.
The Coalition today is committed to building 12 new submarines here in Adelaide.
Labor is demanding those submarines be built here. Don't buy cheaper and maybe better ones from Japan because, well, remember the war.
In the Second World War, 366 merchant ships were sunk off Australia. Under Labor, we will build ships and submarines in Australia because we love this country. Yeah!
Pathetic. Joining me are Bruce Hawker, former Labor campaign guru, and political scientist Jennifer Oriel. Bruce, why did Abbott give this $20 billion contract for these frigates to Adelaide's Australian Submarine Corporation? Because the last time they've been building stuff, it's been too late, too expensive, riddled with faults. The Collins-class submarines, they were actually not fit for wartime type service for years.
I think it's because they want to make up for some of the broken promises they've made to the people of South Australia. I mean, South Australia is in a lot of trouble. It's got very high unemployment. It's around 8% now, much higher than the national average. And they had to do something to address what was clearly, as you point out in your introduction, a broken promise by the incoming government that they would build the submarines in South Australia. So now they're saying, well, we're going to build the frigates in South Australia. We will probably also build these patrol ships, patrol boats or corvettes in South Australia with some work, Victoria. Or maybe some being done in Victoria, but principally in South Australia. So he's put all these eggs into this one basket because of a broken promise that had to be rectified in some way.
Well, it's not a broken promise yet, Jennifer. I mean, they're still saying, oh, well, the subs could be built here. But is Bruce right that this is an attempt to give lots of work to Adelaide to soften it up for the announcement that the subs won't actually be primarily built there?
I would hope not. I think we're dealing with two issues here. First of all, Bill Shorten is clearly trying to shore up his base using populist politics amid fresh claims of union corruption at the Royal Commission. And I think secondly, what we need to look at is Australia being between two ages, to borrow Brzezinski's phrase, in that we're still between a manufacturing or an industrial age and a technological age. And there is one of the great mistakes we've seen over the past 30 years of industrial reform is introducing reform too quickly. So we saw that with the Thatcher era, that the reforms had to happen, the industrial reforms she made, but they happened too quickly and they leave behind a class of manufacturing workers who haven't been skilled for other types of jobs. And I think given that we're raising the retirement age and we've lost large automotive factories in South Australia and Victoria, that the proposal to increase our manufacturing through defence materials is a good one as long as there is a better outcome than the blowout from the building of the aircraft.
Totally accept what you say, right? But what I find extraordinary is that the building of submarines is treated as a work, make work kind of thing, or a test of patriotism, or, do you support South Australia, instead of we're actually talking about the defence of Australia. When you send your sailors out there in a sub, if you think subs are necessary, they've got to be the best subs. It doesn't help to say, oh, at least it's made in Australia when it goes gurgle, gurgle, gurgle into the sea.
Yeah, well, I don't think the Collins class did go gurgle into the sea. I think they had a lot of problems which they sorted out, which always happens, by the way, with first and second generation of any new ship or submarine or whatever. But let's not be in any doubt about...
But that's the whole problem, Bruce, that when you build a sub in Australia, because we don't have a history of that kind of stuff, it is always the first of the kind.
Well, and what's going to happen here, by the way, is that potentially you'll have a first-of-the-kind frigate being built in Australia as well. So that will happen. If you want to go for the cheapest option and probably, you know, an effective option and save the taxpayers money, you'll have it built in Korea or Japan. You'll have the frigates built there. You'll have the corvettes there. You'll have the submarines built there. That's the reality. That's what drove them when they were destroying what was left of the car industry in Victoria and South Australia. That sort of mentality. They're trying to get away from that now because they see that as being part and parcel of the problems that they had as a government in the first 12 months of their term in office. So let's be in no doubt about this, Andrew. This is all about trying to win jobs and votes in South Australia.
Instead of getting the best naval defence for Australia. You know, the other thing, Jennifer, is, you know, this absurd booger about nuclear power. Those subs should be nuclear power. For a country like ours with needing subs with that sort of range, it's ridiculous that we don't consider that. But another argument this week, penalty rates. The Productivity Commission said we should consider dropping Sunday penalty rates for the service industries, restaurants and things like that, from around double time to the Saturday rate to create jobs and so more companies can afford to open. Good idea?
I think it is. We know that penalty rates were originally devised as there was a moral case behind them, and the case was that you needed to have penalty rates so that people who wanted to spend time either at church on the Sabbath on a Sunday or with families and so forth had that time, and they were as kind of compensation. But as the workplace has changed and employers have introduced greater workplace flexibility, I think that has to be a two-way street. Workplace flexibility has to be a two-way street, and at the moment employers are giving a lot, business is giving a lot, but workers haven't really come up to the mark, and I think this is an example where flexibility could be made.
And the Productivity Commission is making the argument that this would actually create lots of work.
However, it's not popular. It's not popular with the Australian public. So Jennifer may be right about a transition again away from old ways of doing things, but the Australian public, as evidenced by the Fairfax poll that was conducted in the last few days, shows that they are strongly in support of penalty rates continuing to apply on weekends. And, you know,
but
for a lot of these
no one's saying no penalty rates. But Bruce, let me come back to you in a second on this, because I want to say you're right. Popularly, at least for workers, not consumers. Consumers want these services on a weekend.
Well,
Labor's jumped on this and straight away dismissed it. Have a look.
People in the retail industry don't earn a lot of money. People in the hospitality industry don't earn a lot of money. What he's trying to do is say to business that the only way you can get ahead is by cutting the wages of people.
So they're exploiting what you're talking about, Bruce, but what I want to ask you is this. Why is Bill Shorten saying penalties cannot be traded away when he did exactly that as a union boss, for example, trading away penalties for cleaners, to a company which then gave his union a fat donation? Listen to the excuse he gave the Royal Commission.
My aim, always, in any EBA, was to try and provide more work and more regular remuneration so people could have certainty of income.
A hypocrite?
Well, Lord make me perfect, but not just yet. Look, these are all... There's a very general argument, obviously, about penalty rates, which he is duty-bound to pursue as the Labor leader and as somebody with strong industrial relationships, and as somebody who I think absolutely believes that you should be paid properly for Sunday, Saturday work. And who knows what the details of that arrangement were. I never worked out what they were, and I'm not going to sit here and sit in judgment on any of those things.
Bruce, let me interrupt. What you're saying is don't judge Bill Shorten by what he does, but by what he's now saying.
Look, he was talking about a very specific issue when he was in the Royal Commission. I don't know the details of all that, and I don't think anybody that saw the proceedings does either.
I think the Royal Commission does.
Well, I don't know that they do.
And
certainly, you know, no one came out of that saying, oh, you're a great hypocrite. What they do see in him, though, well, maybe people who were partisan in their outlook, but I think the general public were pretty unexcited about the whole thing.
Everyone just saw those two clips. Everyone So far, only one MP has lost their job in this uproar over politicians' expenses. The Speaker, Bronwyn Bishop, who resigned last Sunday. I'm back with Bruce Hawker and Jennifer Oriel. Jennifer, why is Bronwyn Bishop the only one to lose her job?
I don't know. Given, what we've seen in the last few days is quite incredible that Tony Burke has spent almost 5 times the amount on an overseas trip with his family and then staffer as Bronwyn spent on the helicopter flight. And so there is definitely a double standard operating here, and the Labor Party is being very glass-jawed about it. But I think what's come out of this is that we need much greater transparency about how MPs are spending our money, and also I think more transparency about donations in as well. So we want transparency across the financial portfolio.
And I think we need a better list of, when they claim for travel,
yes.
Who did they see? How does that class as business? For how long do they see them? But Bruce, what's happened here is, right, Bronwyn Bishop, they went, bang, you're dead, let's call off the war. It stinks.
Well, I think what now we are seeing is that this was an entitlement that was honoured in the breach, and I don't think any of them want to be anywhere near it.
But why Bronwyn
so they're
Bishop?
all walking away.
Bronwyn Bishop's the only one?
Because
they don't like
it was quite egregious what she did, and then now we're seeing more, but we're seeing more and more of it now, and everybody is saying, oh, let's just walk away from this. It's all too difficult.
Yeah, and that's Joe Hockey's expenses now, flying his family to a family reunion in Perth.
All of them.
Business class as well. But this is what really amazes me, right? First, Bronwyn Bishop has to go, and then both sides say, let's call off the war now. Yep. It's like it's about her. And I've got to apologise to you, Bronwyn, because I thought that by insisting you should go, one rule for all, and I didn't know it was only one rule for you and not for anyone else.
But can I just say there's something much more important in all this, and that's the way it's affected Tony Abbott, and a perception in the public that this is a sort of a redoing of the Prince Philip problem that he had in January last year, which led to all the problems he had in February, which I think are coming back. The latest Fairfax poll has
there's a Reachtel poll, 47-53 against the coalition. The Essential poll this week, 47-53, also against.
Yeah, which is exactly where Newspoll had him, by the way, in February when the challenge took place inside the party room. He's dropping against Shorten. Shorten is preferred Prime Minister by 58 to 41.
Well, that's specifically after this, which...
I think this is the big story, mate. I really do. I think this is the case that the knives are coming out.
Well, the ALP has yet to announce any real policies, so why don't we wait and see what people think until after they've done
But Jennifer,
that.
this is the whole thing, right? Yes, the Labor Party has a leader who's facing yet more accusations regarding his past, who's not popular himself, who's released no real policies, and those policies he has would send the deficit flying, and yet he's ahead.
I think Tony Abbott, what isn't really in the public conversation yet, but is really affecting Tony Abbott as a Prime Minister, is that he's an introverted Prime Minister in a country that's about 80% extrovert.
Big mistake. Big mistake then.
No,
you don't get introverts as your Prime Minister.
No, that's not true. There have been
and by the way,
Winston
he can be quite extroverted too.
Churchill was introverted. So we know that introversion can play out in various ways, but one of the things Abbott, I think, has to do now is realise that he's about to go into campaign mode, and that is an extroverted
he's been
role.
in campaign mode
it's an extroverted role, so he's going to have to come out of his shell.
The idea that he's an introvert is just nonsense. He's not an introvert, he's an extroverted character. He is a very effective opposition leader. His problem is that he's a very poor Prime Minister.
I don't think he is. I disagree.
And now time is running out for the Liberal Party.
No, it's
and they don't want to get themselves into the position which Labor was in, where they waited for 54 days or 74 days, whatever it was, before the election had to be held, to change leaders back to Rudd again. They've got to make some hard decisions, and I think it's going to happen soon.
The Liberal Party needs to sew up all of the parts. They have a story to tell. They haven't told it yet.
I think you're right. They have not introduced Tony Abbott as a person.
But you made the
that
point.
That goes to your point and both of yours point.
When
that
are they going to do that?
Been too introverted.
He's been leader since 2009.
I agree. I've said it for ages.
They're not going to turn him into something that the public like.
I thought he came back. I thought he looked markedly different last Monday when he returned, and he looked much stronger than he has in previous months.
The poll that has him behind, by the way, was taken after all those decisions were made about the frigates and the patrol boats.
Yeah, but
none of that
Bishop thing has just exploded all that. Sunk all those frigates.
None of that has had any effect on Bill Shorten's popularity as preferred Prime Minister.
The press hasn't taken
the
on
Royal
Bill
Commission
Shorten.
hasn't done that either. So, we've got a real issue. If you're the Liberal Party now, you're looking at this bloke and saying, how long are we going to stick with him?
No, I don't think
Very quickly, the new Speaker to be chosen tomorrow. 5 Liberal backbenchers, at least, have put up their hand, including Andrew Southcote, Ross Vasta and Philip Ruddock, former Immigration Minister. Perhaps the favourites are former frontbencher Tony Smith and Russell Broadbent, both Victorians. Whoever wins, what must change?
I think it's the way in which the Speaker operates. Bronwyn Bishop did the role of Speaker a big disservice by being so partisan. We have to look much...
Labor's Anna Burke was partisan.
No, nothing like that. We have to look now at the British system where the Speaker basically withdraws from partisan politics, is not even challenged at the election when they're still the Speaker, and acts totally independently.
All right, very quickly, billionaire Donald Trump, amazingly way in front of the polls to be the Republican nomination for president in next year's election. He was one of the 17 Republican candidates who debated this week for the first time. Anyone stand out?
Not really.
I think we have a really interesting politics in the US in that there's a new conservative front populated by people who are from ethnically diverse backgrounds. Ted Cruz and Ben Carson. Now, what I find really interesting... Marco Rubio. What I find fascinating and very, very different from the Australian context in recent days is that race in that isn't treated as race. Those men are regarded as human beings and politicians first.
As they should be. Carson and the race, made very strongly.
That's right. They will not be judged. They will not be judged by the colour of their skin, content of the character, and it's something that we need to learn in Australia.
Trump had a very tough time in that debate. He was blustering. He was caught out on anything involving detail. He was caught out about having to change his tune from the days he was a Democrat. Blustering again. He was asked about attacks on women he didn't like, calling them fat dogs, slobs, and disgusting animals. Here was his response.
And I don't frankly have time for total political correctness. And to be honest with you, this country doesn't have time either. This country is in big trouble. We don't win anymore.
When did you actually become a Republican?
I don't think they like me very much.
Can this guy possibly become the Republican nominee?
He could, but it would be terrible for the Republicans if he did, because he would galvanise a lot of Americans who probably would be inclined to vote Republican into the Democrat camp.
Well, I could hear half of them booing, even in the Republican conference there. Jennifer Oriel, Bruce Hawker, thank you so much for joining me. And coming up, why does the media think so?